right, welcome back. It's an honor and a privilege to present our next keynote speaker. He's a chief scientist at the Biota Institute and associate researcher at University of California, Santa Cruz, Department of Biomolecular Engineering. Dr. Bruce Damer, practices from a visionary reverie as described by Albert Einstein, has his thought experiments, drawing from the early works of James Fadiman on the use of psychedelics in creative problem solving. He developed practices utilizing both endogenous meditative states and exogenous plant entheogens, which have been key enablers of his scientific and technical breakthroughs. Here, we should give a warm welcome to Bruce Damer for his talk that he's going to speak on. It's High Time for Science, Psychedelics as Tools for Scientific Discovery. Please give a warm welcome.
First off, I want to thank the McKenna Academy for taking a shot or taking a chance on this new subject matter. Thank you, Dennis, for bringing this in.
Thank you, Bruce, for rising to the challenge.
And it's all his fault anyway, because he was visiting at Ancient Oaks Farm in 2011 on his book tour for Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, and I had no pipe. So this is where it all started. He said, "Do you have an apple?" So we cored an apple, and it saved the day. And but after smoking quite a few puffs on that apple, he told me the story of in the jungle in Brazil with the UDV. Having an amazing breakthrough experience, which was that the plants came to Dennis and said, "Let us show you how we feed you." Can you imagine? Let us show you how we feed you and sustain you. And Dennis was suddenly a water molecule. And he was in the process of photosynthesis in full 3D, full high def, just gobsmacked, to use a British expression. Came out of it, and on the way out, the plants basically said, "Now you have to take care of us." It is the most beautiful thing I'd heard from a psychedelic geek head. And it gave me permission to even consider that this could happen for me in my work. And what you'll hear about in my little storytelling is that result. So, by the way, this is published in Luis's Ayahuasca Reader and in Brotherhood as well, this telling. So let me start with this wonderful word genius, which has Latin roots, which roughly mean an attendant spirit present from one's birth, an innate ability, and I love this, from the root to beget in Latin. So that's what genius means. And when we hear that word, for me, and perhaps for you too, I get a sense of excitement, because genius comes with truly fresh new things for the world, truly powerful new things, and a sense of wonder about where does it come from, as we wonder where is the source of genius. You know, societies throughout history have wondered this, and awe that it can even come through human minds at all. Like, what is going on, as Terence used to ask, what is going on with these downloads? And our civilization is totally marked by genius. All the major points of innovation, of arts, of music, of military strategy, of everything comes through this sudden flash of genius. And it's the front edge of our evolution. And I would suggest to you that if we don't have more of it, or we don't use it, we won't make it through the coming challenges. And my tribe, then called the tribe of what would you call them? I don't know, neurodivergent tribe. We're all neurodivergent in this room, but they are the scientists and the engineers, they're close cousins, and all nerdly peoples on the earth We're slowly assimilating all of you. And we play hide and seek with genius. It is our job to come up with solutions to gnarly scientific problems, to crack the code of some AI optimization that is just so crazy and hard to figure out, or to look through a massive climate data set and like try to find a truth in it. So that we're always playing hide and seek. We know it's out there. We're trying to talk to it. We're trying to find it, get a glimpse of it. Because we know that, careers are built on that. Great fortunes are built on that, especially where we come from in Silicon Valley. And if we don't have that, it's an existential requirement that we have to have more of it for what is coming, the complexity of what's coming, as we take on the biosphere as its caretaker, right? It's a big job, right? Job posting, intelligent species to manage the biosphere ruined and destabilized by same intelligent species, apply within. So that's what we're facing. So perhaps we've been evolved for genius. On the plains of Africa, there were probably strokes of genius going on all the time. Maybe after taking a few of those coprophytic mushrooms, for example. But perhaps genius in all its forms is the greatest thing the universe has learned how to do, I would suggest. So let's break genius down. It's a form of creativity that we all do, but it's a pretty extreme form. It's a pretty extreme form. And it's usually multiple parallel streams coming together in a kind of reverie. And a famous example of this, I don't know if you saw this wonderful series, I think it was on National Geographic, about Albert Einstein's life. Anyone seen that? It's just a great series. And they depict Einstein's moments of his major thought experiments, Gedankenexperimente. And he described these in his writings and in his lifetime. Here's a particular one where Einstein is considering a man, in this case it's Einstein, falling in an elevator. The elevator is falling free. For some reason, the elevator operator is not floating, but Einstein is floating along with all of his papers and all his briefcase and everything. So he has this moment, and he's standing there, and the whole world shuts down, and this reverie comes over, this trance comes over Einstein as he visualizes this, and it seems to come from somewhere else. And then the elevator reverses direction, is now accelerating up, pushing his feet to the earth. And then he places the elevator in orbit, where in fact there is no earth and there's no quote-unquote gravity, and it's still accelerating through space, and he's still feeling it on his feet, and then he has the happiest moment of his life, that gravity and acceleration are the same. This incredible moment, and that's birthed to general relativity 10 years later, after all the math was done. It's pretty extraordinary. And right in my own world, my colleague Dave Deemer from UC Santa Cruz, he had a flash of genius in 1989, and this is a page from the notebook that represents it. So he was driving along through Oregon, and he had 4 streams in his head: membranes, which are the boundary walls of cells, ions moving across them, a strand of DNA, and a Coulter counter. And a Coulter counter is a cell counting device. And he'd been kind of working this for months. Like, he was trying to figure out how to get ATP, a smaller molecule, across the membrane. And then suddenly he's driving there, and it comes in a flash, a complete working model of a new invention, of a brilliant, that he knew would work. It all came at once. And it's called the nanopore sequencer. And what you can see there is his sketch is now quite a famous sketch published in Nature and all the journals and books and things. And it's showing bases from DNA getting pulled through the membrane. And as they're pulled through the membrane, they create these voltage interruptions. And depending on the peaks, you can tell what base just went through. And it's now a medical device. It's a gene sequencer you can hold in your hand. It's a chip that was taken on by a company in Oxford called Oxford Nanopore, and the company went public, and it's worth $10 billion at this point. So this is what genius can launch, and has launched many times, Apple being an example of one such company. So these extraordinary states are characterized by a trance or reverie, and what it comes down to, if you look at the early work on genius, and genius was kind of a no-no term in psychology until the late 60s, early 70s, when Dean Simonton at Davis finally said, are any of my colleagues discussing this? Or no, it was kind of a no-no thing. It had been studied in the 19-teens and 20s by Terman at Stanford, who came up with the Stanford-Binet test for IQ. But it went out of favor, it went underground. So Simonton brought it all back. And a wonderful researcher named Nancy Andreessen at Iowa, University of Iowa, she happened to be I think she was an Elizabethan scholar, and she decided that this thing about genius and neuroscience is more interesting for her. And she was sitting right next to the Iowa Writers' Workshop, the greatest workshop of writers and poets in the US. And she took them as her patients or as her subjects, because they're all of some form of genius, of creative genius. Andrew Lloyd Webber, for example. And so she put these people into brain scanners, early PET scanners. And so here's Andrew Lloyd Webber's brain. I'm not sure if it is, but Andrew Lloyd Webber's brain, and then this sort of normal person's brain. And she's throwing him word associations. And more regions are sort of lighting up. And so her initial thought was there's some kind of nonlinear entropic dynamic system that kicks in, but they couldn't really see where it was and what it was. And it's just firing more. It seems to be more connected. This is 2003 or 4 or something like that. And as you heard from David Nutt, look at where we are now. We now have a model of the default mode network, which are the nodes in this network. We know about the PCC, the posterior cingulate cortex, which is the master commander that is telling it, okay, visual inputs coming in, you do that. Auditory, you do that. Does it match my predictions? Fine. Don't ever anyone waste battery power. So that's what's coming out of Imperial and other groups. Just an amazing thing. So what it is this idea of, and this isn't necessarily genius, this is a brain on psilocybin, but this is a model that maybe is a brain that is in a trance state on a creative breakthrough like a brain on psilocybin. That's an open question. And since this is all new material, I profess to have no answers to those questions, but these are open questions. But perhaps the greatest writing on this so far is from Amanda Fielding, who's right now in Davos having dinners with amazing people. Not that we're not amazing, but a friend just called her and she was just having an amazing time. But she says it beautifully. When the default mode network is knocked out, it is like the conductor of an orchestra no longer being there. So all the different instruments can start making their own sound and doing their own thing. They become more united with everything else and with an external world. That opens up the new possibilities of connectivity and aha moments of realization. So perhaps Amanda's genius is the insight that this is how genius actually works within this new science. It's phenomenally exciting stuff that she's been on the track of for decades. She's been thinking about this. So why am I standing up here even talking about any of this? I think it's illustrative to explain my journey, because I think it's the way I'm built from birth or before birth. And so going way back, so I was 4 years old in Victoria, British Columbia, where I was born. I would do these long walks, and I felt like a balloon floating above the earth. I literally could feel my consciousness going above the houses and mapping the entire thing. It's pretty trippy for a 4-year-old kid. And my parents didn't know what was going on with me, but I was a spectrum kid before there was a spectrum. The word Asperger's didn't exist in medical science. And my parents had me be checked out by a psychologist, so I got to pound square pegs into round holes, and I made it happen. I shaved the corners off first, and so I passed the test, but that's what they did in the 60s. They did all these tests for little kids, and they declared he was not retarded, but bright, and just sent me home. So there was nothing to do. But perhaps the reason I was this way is that I was adopted at birth. I was given up at birth in a ward for 10, 12 days, a little baby coming home. And when my mother took me, literally her first intuition was, this one's in its own world. So perhaps I was shaped by that experience. But they let me wander and do what I wanted to do. Just let me be. And one of the things I was obsessed by was the space program. So in 1969, I was taking the garbage cans to the street in our home in Kamloops, British Columbia. I know there's someone here from Kelowna. And I just was looking at, they're on the moon, the two astronauts on the moon. Michael Collins is in the command and service module. And I was like projecting my mind, trying to see him orbiting there, which you couldn't, and try to see any kind of little silver dot on the moon, which even Michael Collins couldn't see them with a scope, so it was hopeless for me. But then I went back to bed, I closed my eyes, and something started to happen. And there were these glowing blobs behind my eyes. It's like, and they'd come a couple times before, and I was like, what are these things? And then it occurred to me that, hey, I just saw a color TV for the first time because I watched the Apollo launch down the street. We didn't even have a TV, I don't think, or a little black and white TV. And I thought, maybe it's like color TV. If I can twiddle knobs, I can somehow get this stuff to get more resolution. What the heck is going on? And then I thought, wait a minute. No, it's my brother. He's flashing me with a flashlight, or telling me about no body people under the bed or something like that. And I opened my eyes and no, he's not. He's asleep, like it's a dark room. It's like, wow, this is coming from inside. Well, we can work with this. I love this. And so what I learned how to do, and I can even do it right now, is turn down everything. Like, there, it's turned down. So turn down thinking of any sort, language, shut it off, shut that off, shut that off, shut that off, shut that off, and the washes start to accelerate. And they kind of look like dishwasher going over plates, and then they slow. And that was my cue always to like, just open. Just not even look at it. Don't look at it. Don't even process it visually. And then it starts to form into things, more colorful things. And then it opened into worlds. And so this is kind of what it looked like. I looked on the web, and this is called hypnagogia. By a lot of fields call this hypnagogia, but I felt I could dial it in if I could only get my mind out of the way, and that there existed some world somewhere that this was able to come from. So I started to see things, all kinds of landscapes. I would be zooming over landscapes, all kinds of spacecraft whizzing through the skies in these worlds. And I started to draw them out, explore them deeply. I started to let them guide me. So I think if there's another reality, and it's super cool, and it's like a station broadcasting, then it can do all kinds of things. What about if it can guide you in the world? So I walked out the door, at age 11, I walked out the door of my parents' house and said, I'm going to let this thing, I'm going to connect into it and let it walk me. And let it walk me around the block, and turn here. Go here. And amazing, miraculous things would happen. If I was in my head worried about, I've got to return this baseball to my friend, I'd never find my friend. If I was being guided by this process, my friend would find me. And so I call it the A-B plan. I decided to go with plan B, this intuitive bouncing around through synchronous field plan. So that was sort of by the time I was about 12. And then I started to draw the worlds. And so here's some of the pretty whizzy spacecraft. I drew thousands of these, and landscapes, and just, when I was in school, I didn't take notes in my book. I had to hide this from the teachers. I didn't really know how to write, actually, very well. So as the teacher was talking, I was drawing a single piece of paper was a complex world, and I would draw it over the entire term. And to study for the test, I just remembered that single image. And what she said on this day was up here, and it would come back 100%. Complete, that's how I could do a test. And then I got nailed for it, and I had to learn how to do linear scrawls that today I can't even do those. It's just ridiculous. Like, how can I learn from that? So that was the teen years. I had really was experiencing my first trips. And it was like a TV receiver that I was sort of programming and designing. So I got to high school, but instead of this turning off, which it does for most people, this kind of trippiness that little kids have, it was growing. I was keeping it going because partly I was so bored that I had to live in those worlds just to survive. But I found out about there's a high IQ society called Mensa, so I took their test and I got in. It's like all these people interested in space and puzzles. It's my paradise, it's my people, and they can do tests. And then I was designing whole things. I found out that this system, this alternate reality, I could use it to do whole designs really fast. So I did an entire board game, too complicated for any one of my friends to want to play, in my head in a series of massive design roles. And then I made all the pieces and I made all the parts to move it and play it. And one boy came over to play it, and that was it. That was the end of the game. But it seemed to me that game was living in my head and running completely, running all the parameters, all possibilities. And I even did spacecraft and asteroid mining things and sent them to NASA. I drew them out, sent them to Gerard O'Neill in Princeton. Got letters back even too, surprisingly. So these visual downloads became my profession. And I didn't tell anyone about them. In fact, this is a reveal for me today. I didn't tell anyone about the IQ test or the inner worlds. I didn't want any of that. It was like completely private. Because I felt in a way I would disturb it and shatter it if I talked about it. So it became my profession. I built whole visual operating systems with mouse and Windows and stuff before there was such a thing. That in the 80s, I started this whole thing of virtual worlds on the internet with avatars. That's how Terrence and I actually met later. It was a workshop constantly running in my head. It's still running today around these cool problems I'm working on. But I avoided psychedelics like the plague. We were in the sort of early war on drugs period in the 70s. This is your brain on drugs. Well, that was the 80s. They showed up egg in a frying pan. In the 70s, they did even scarier things to us little kids. I can't even remember. I was so traumatized. But I couldn't even take an aspirin. If I did that, I'd go to the moon. Just couldn't take anything. And so I felt that this inner world, the access to it could get cut off if I had anything strong go through my system. It was very fragile, I thought. It had to be cared for. So until I moved to Northern California. Well, this is Oregon, Ken Kesey, and further. I have a bus called No Further on our property, but so I got into it. I mainlined the whole thing. I read Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test. I met one of the original hippies before there were hippies, who was at Ken Kesey's house when they painted this bus, or the predecessor to it, and rolled across the country in the unpsychedelic summer of 1964. So I met all these people who were dying. They were on their way out, the counterculture hippies, and I got completely obsessed by it. And so it's no wonder that, one day this guy walks in the door of my farm in 1998. It's Terrence McKenna, Dennis's brother. And I'd seen him in cyberspace. We had been corresponding for a couple of years. And I thought, well, maybe it's time. Maybe it's time. I'm 36 years old. He's walking in the door with Finn and Ralph Abraham. And I plunked him down at a big screen, and he was interested in virtual worlds. These invisible landscapes made by code, made by language, which I was a kind of pioneer of. So that's how we met. So I sat him down in front of a big screen, and I put him into the earliest cyber cities. And it was just a wonderful meeting. And then later went to his house in Hawaii, where we did an experiment. We called it the Alchemical Virtual Powwow. Yes, folks, 30 people showed up in Avatar, in World. There's Terrence on screen. There's a bunch of avatars there. Finn built this hyperboreal gate, which everybody went through and took a trip in a tryptamine-inspired virtual world. And then we compared notes about it. So it was really cool. Now, I have to say that I hadn't at that time been into Terrence's worlds, the psychedelic realms. I never told Terrence about my inner worlds that were running all the time. We just didn't talk about that. And as Terrence can't get arrested posthumously, him providing this nice big sack of psilocybin mushrooms, of cubensis, nobody can come and take him away, or any of you, hopefully very soon. But in a genius move one night, because I had no sense and no scale, I just decided to eat I didn't think they were going to work. I just did not think they were going to work, because when I went to the dentist and they shot me to numb me up, that didn't work either. Within 2 minutes it was gone. They had to shoot me again. There's something weird with my system. And so I just said, well, what I'll do, I've got this jug of juice. I'll just eat them until I'm stuffed. And I got stuffed, so it definitely worked. And so not to share too many details, the effect was just phenomenal. I mean, it was like, what I did though on the way in is I said, I've got to protect my machinery, my delicate machinery of visioning, and I shut it down. I figured out how to twiddle knobs to shut it down, put a firewall up. So as the mushroom part came in, as this raging storm began, they were nicely protected in their little bunker. And I left that little firewall up every time I did a medicine for 10 years to make sure that system wasn't affected by anything. And I'll tell you what happened when the firewall came down a little bit later. But so Terrence and I had swapped places, and we compared notes on tryptamine worlds, virtual and psychedelic. And it was a wonderful thing, and he was gone within a year. I really miss him still, actually. We were becoming kind of an intellectual partnership. In some ways, this talk here today is continuing that partnership, this inquiry, and you'll hear more in a bit. So that trip was a defining moment for the rest of my life, not because it was a trip, and it was pretty profound, but because it opened me to my heart. Because the nature of the trip was an implosion of the cosmos into love. This is the fire of love. It was just tremendous. And that I was in it. I was, for the first time, connected with all and not alone. And it was a big reboot. So the next morning, I was on a pile of boulders next to the rushing stream in the Southern Sierra, and I felt complete as a human being. I was complete. And so I was at rest. I was comfortable in my skin, not striving, not worrying, not nervous. And that's a really nice reset to get at any age, but certainly partway through your life. So you build from there. You build from that base instead. And what happened was, in some sense, Terrence, through mushrooms, contacted aliens. I learned how to contact people, humans. And you're all aliens anyway, as far as our neurotribe is concerned. You're all annoying aliens. We are too. So I actually, in order to bust the concrete off my system, the sort of Asperger concrete, I actually took a higher dose of a research tryptamine that was an ordeal poison. It was 4.5 hours of brain fire. It was a struggle for survival. I had to get super disciplined to get through that one. And it was in a laboratory setting, and it worked. And it stripped me so far down that I was no longer afraid to make eye contact. It was incredible. I made eye contact with the TSA airport security, with all the people in the airport. And I could barely walk because I couldn't walk for a week after this thing. But it was a huge gift to be able to look you in the eye. And that's that's what can happen to spectrumy people. It was pretty severe, but this is part of my journey of opening up. So my system, my delicate, fragile visioning system, I thought, is it getting any better? It's getting a little taste of this. And it was getting higher def. It was going from 60s color TV to high def 2000s. It was starting to power up even more. And so what I want to do is introduce that first comes the healing, then the revealing. So if we heal ourselves in this work, then, and I think this is an old shamanic idea, then the visions that are the revealing can come. I think this goes way back. So it's like a necessary thing that we have to heal before we can get the downloads, including even scientific and technical downloads. Healing, then revealing. So I decided to come up with a term for what is my machinery. I'm just calling it this machinery. And I decided to call it endo, for endogenously sourced. Endo tripping. Like tripping that just comes from within, And then, well, we would call the rest of the things that come from outside, which would include breath work, would include all kinds of things, but also psychedelics, exo tripping. And then the question I asked was, how do endo and exo dance together? If they're both potent systems, both probably affecting the same brain areas. And so I wanted to experience what happens when they meet. And so I went back into the literature, and I've got a wonderful collection that came through Timothy Leary that sits in the barn. And so I went back to the first publication about psychedelics in the first journal called Psychedelic Review, and it was published in May, June of 1963. And the very first article is this article by Gerald Hurd, who's a philosopher. And I thought, well, let's go to the source of scholarly people thinking about psychedelics who have experienced it. What did he have to say as the psychedelic Renaissance started? So Gerald Hurd writes, in the article, can this drug enlarge man's mind? Sorry for the people who are not man here, but can enlarge human beings' mind? He says, narcotics numb it. Alcohol unsettles it. Now a new chemical called LSD has emerged with phenomenal powers of intensifying and changing it. Whether for good or ill is a subject of hot debate. This is 1963. So he also writes in the article, leave chemicals aside for a moment. There's an other state of mind known to and described by poets, as well as higher mathematicians and other scientific geniuses, in which deeply insightful processes can take place. To have a truly original thought, the mind must throw off its critical guard, its filtering censor. It must put itself into a state of depersonalization. Talk about wisdom at the dawn of the psychedelic era. So the best researchers, when confronting problems and riddles that had defied all solution by ordinary methods, did employ their minds in an unusual way, did put themselves into a state of egoless creativity, which permitted them to have insights so remarkable that by means of these they were able to make their greatest and most original discoveries. And he concludes with, can LSD provide any assistance to the creative process? Even when given under the best of conditions, this is before set and setting, it may do no more than give an experience. Thereafter, the subject must work with this enlarged frame of reference, this creative schema. If he will not, the experience remains a beautiful anomaly, a gradually fading wonder. So, amazing, right? They were thinking about this as far back as that. So how about this? High time for a scientist. This is my own story about how I then went on to employ these medicines for my own science. And this is the first time I've ever talked about this in public. So I'm a little bit sensitive to it because in our field, just as in others, there's a bit of a taboo And yet, we find our colleagues at Google are microdosing, and we find people that we meet share their heroic dose experiences. So I'm putting this on the record today, folks, because I think it'll help. Thank you. So it's all started with this, a Mariposa lily bursting up through the frozen soils near my parents' house in Kamloops, British Columbia. And I was just walking there. I was 14 years old, and I stood and looked at it, and I was just dumbfounded by its beauty and thinking, how could such a complex structure emerge from a simple thing under the ground, a bulb, which is just a bulb. It's like pretty simple, and then you get complex. And then I stood up and I looked around like, all these things are complex things emerging from simple things. And the whole planet is that way. Therefore, there were simpler things all the way back, and my mind was blown. Like, there had to be one seed. There was somewhere. There was one start somewhere. And I was stunned. And my mind was groping around trying to find, like, go back through time and try to see it. Because I kind of had trained myself to do that as a little kid. And I was walking back toward my parents' house and saying, that's the coolest thing a nerdy kid could work on, is where this all came from, life, from some place when there wasn't life. And I thought, well, I'm 14, let's see, people are living longer, I might live to 104 or 124 or something. I could work on this for 90 years. I think I'll do it. So I continued walking to my parents' house, and instead of an endo trip, I had an exo-endo trip. There was a thing that appeared right here, hanging in space in front of me. This bundle of things that looked like Tinker Toy or something, or Meccano toys. And I realized, oh, that's molecules. What's going on? And it stayed moving. It was in constant motion. I was trying to figure out the little angles of motion. What's it trying to do? And I said, oh, this is a thought experiment I just read about that Albert Einstein used to do. When he was 16 years old, he was running alongside beams of light and all sorts of, oh, cool, this is what happens. And I was about to ask it the question, dear bundle of molecules, how did all this begin? What's the common seed? And it shot me a question. And I can't say it's verbally, but I was impacted by all the words that weren't words, which was figure out how I made a copy of myself. And I thought, I flashed to a factory making cars. I said, well, car's a machine, and he's a huge machine to make it, and you're a machine clearly, and I don't see a huge machine making you. How can a simple machine make a bigger, more complex thing? And it winked at me and winked out of existence. Work on it. So I went back and I went back to my parents and thought, I'm going to work on it. So roll the clock to 2013, and I've been doing the science. I've been doing a tremendous amount of thinking. I've met Dave Deemer at UC Santa Cruz, and my endogenous channel is really cranking. The tools are there. And the figuring out how I made a copy of myself, we're up to the limit. We're up to this hard limit of we can't crack this code. And then I go to this place, which is a Maloka north of Pucallpa, in a place called Rinquilla. And it was a tremendous place. It was one of the earliest ayahuasca retreat spaces established way in the heck back. Don Jose Campos and Ronnie were the two partners. Probably some have been there, maybe. Maybe you played an instrument there, because the music was always so good. So I'm in this Maloka, and with this very, very seasoned crew from Los Angeles. And what I had done for the previous 2 years is I was taking Aya, having incredible healing experiences and visions, and then I started intuitively saying, I'm going to go down to lower doses. I don't know why. And I got down to lower doses, and by this time I'm down to 1/24th of a dose. I put it on my tongue and hold it there for 5 or 10 minutes to talk to it. And if it's too much, I'll take it out with a tissue to down dose myself. It was Ronnie's Bruce. It was super thick, like castor oil, so you could manage it. And Ronnie would joke sometimes like, tonight the rule is a full cup. And look over at me because I was doing this incredible doses. But I had this intuitive sense that this small dose would somehow be better. And so I then decided, because I was on such a small dose, to do an experiment, which was to take down the wall between my endo and my exo and let them mix. In order to get to that point, I had to stay in absolute attention for 2 hours because it's such a small dose, it's going to take a long time. And so I did. And then I wound in all this presence energy. I twiddled the knobs on my mind, turned everything way down so that I get good screen. And suddenly there was the wavy patterns of Mama Aya, of the serpent is coming in. I said, okay, we'll push the button. Firewall goes down, and I can feel it right now. This flush starts happening. And then I close my eyes, and I can see the wash patterns coming up. And I could compare that with that. So I wanted to know, is this is DMT and several other things, and what is this thing that has been coming into me for all these years? Is it DMT? And it felt like it was. Is it compatible with those two things? And then they started to swirl around each other and merge. And then suddenly it was an explosion. My body was vibrating. Wow, this is unbelievable. Like, I felt my body now producing DMT on a vast scale. And it could have been just the intention or the opening, or it could have been the amount of MAOI coming in, but I was cranking. And so I was totally on, and I turned, because when you're in this sort of state, it's like everything that comes in from the jungle, every sign, every shape is a sign for you. Pay attention, pay attention. And I looked over, and there was a curving shadow. And I realized that that's the shape of the bridge under which I was conceived by my parents in the back of a 50s Ford. That was what I was told before my father died, because I did meet them later. And so I realized I am going to be shown my birth. And I shaped myself into the sperm that I had to be. What do? You ask the experience, what do I do? And you get guidance. And I was shot into the birth, into the fallopian tubes and into the egg. And the egg saw the sperm. And, without getting into too much detail, it was incredible. But the most incredible part of it was at about 4 months, I was a growing embryo. I was sort of post-embryo and almost human. And I could feel her. I could feel my mother for the first time. I felt that love that I never had. And it healed a rupture. It was a great gift. It was a great gift. And just for a moment, and then there was a whispering. And no one was talking in the Maloka. There was just a shadow talking to a shadow. And I realized it was my parents giving me up. And they were making the decision, this one has to go. We're too poor. And then I felt the love connection drop. And then I went internal. I could feel like the proto-being saying, then we have to take care of the little one. And there was an observer that was taking care of the little one by taking it on trips and comforting it. So that when I shot out into the world and my mother came to get me, I was truly in my own world. I was a spacecraft at that time. Yeah. So, let's see, where are we? So roll forward. So I have the experience. I'm standing there. I'm literally, I've seen my own origins. I've been through my own origins. And I'm landed. And Mama Aya is just sort of in the area. And I said, thank you. And you're pretty cool. And, she said, you're pretty cool too. We had a good relationship. We were on good speaking terms most of the time. Anyway, I said, well, I feel like I have capacity. Would you like to go back to where we were all born? I thought, that's an idea. We have the power to do this right here. I'm so clear. I'm so clean. It's like an open channel. And so we did our merger thing, so we weren't two things, and then I pulled a lever, and the lever powered up the endo system. And the endo system was cranking. And it powered up, okay, this is how we run the simulation of going back 4.1 billion years, and fast, because we have limited time and capacity. And so we launch into sperm that go back to my father's sperm and his father's and his father's and father's, this ricocheting pattern down through the animals, down through the tetrapods, down through the worms, down into the eukaryotic fungi, down, 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 through, and then suddenly now we have to get through the microbial cloud, which is crazy big in terms of join points. So I pulled a lever, rocketing through that crowd, checked my brain temps because it was going, they were going up, 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 and I was going to get out if I was going to pull the ripcord if it got too much because it was driving so hard. Because in endo tripping you can do that. I mean, and then we burst out. You know, my view burst out above something like this that Ryan Norcus and I rendered. It was a volcanic island in the Hadean, splashing into the pool of the island, coming down into the environment we've been studying in our science for 5 or 8 years, which is protocells, these lipid sacs full of RNA and DNA and peptides that we had learned how to make in the lab in large numbers. Self-assemble is a huge breakthrough, but I couldn't see all the way to life. I couldn't see all the way to life, and this is where the breakthrough happened. I then asked, as you all should in super high state trips like this, just say, what do I do? You don't have an answer. You're there for guidance. And the answer often is in these states, become it. Become it now. And the protocell, I was suddenly becoming the protocell, becoming the thing. And there was one particular one that had a lot of neon effects in it and seemed to have a lot of stuff together. So I became that thing, and then I started blacking out. I started passing out. I was dying. And I asked on the way out, what is going on? And the answer was, you're about to be born. You can't be here. You must go through birth. And I was out for a period of time and then came to in a scream, an internal scream where my body was this flaccid sack of molecules. And in the middle of all that, a part was bursting off, was budding off, and it was black inside. And there was basically a piano trace of polymers moving. And my observer, my little crystal observer that I had since I was a kid was running a high-speed camera to capture it all. I mean, then there was an experiencer experiencing it. And holy cadoodles, what is this? And the little vacuole budded off and it was black. The polymers moved like with an unseen hand, and that was it. That was the clue. That was the download. That was the vision. And I went back to my Tombow, and I was running it over and over again, repatterning it, speaking it, running it, all with the full emotion, getting it down like, this is the vision. And it was more of a question than an answer. And 3 months later, in an endo experience of breath work, I had the answer come at the end of a breathwork and yoga session. It was a complete flow of the whole system. So this was a beautiful pattern of an exo assistance going way beyond what normal cognitive process can do, and then coming back and interpreting it and working the open questions and continuing to do that type of work, and then having a beautiful answer delivered. Which turned into, this is my first sketch from the endo trip that delivered the solution based on the mystery that was posed to me in Aya. So there's our little bundle from when I was 14. This is from 2013. And this turned into a whole hypothesis called the coupled phases model for the origin of life. That I sketched this out, sent it to Dave Deemer, and he wrote back, you found it. You found the kinetic trap. It was a eureka moment. It was really the happiest moment of my life. Just like Einstein floating in the elevator. And it went somewhere. It had legs because we could interpret it into the language of science. We could publish experiments. Our colleagues found rocks in Australia that were almost as old as the origin of life that showed evidence for a hot spring origin of life. So it ended up on the cover of this magazine. And they did this beautiful job of the cycling pool. There it is right there. Wet and dry cycling, complex polymers, and then budding happening. Amazing. And then it ended up on the cover of this magazine 2 years ago, Astrobiology, as a full worked out hypothesis, which is now spreading around our community. It's taken over from the origin of life in the oceans. And so we're back in Darwin's warm little pond again. And this story in Nature, about a year and a half ago, kind of announced that this huge paradigm shift was underway. So what I'm bringing to you is that this can really work. This marriage of this type of brain, this kind of training, this type of preparation, and this intention, and the mixture of medicine can deliver a phenomenal vision that lands in the world and produces value for humanity. So psychedelics can drive creative breakthroughs in science, and maybe even flashes of genius. So let's take this all apart. What I'd like to do right now in this last little 5 minutes is to propose a set of, because this is new. Willis Harman's work grew into Jim Fadiman's work on microdosing for creativity, and there have been some studies since, but it's not really a launched thing. David Nutt said, we're not doing anything like this at Imperial, and it'll be hard to measure. I talked to Cody from River Styx Foundation. He said, we should start at it, like Johns Hopkins. We should start something. So that's as early as you can get in something. So at this conference, these are just the back of the envelope ideas for this potentially new branch of psychedelic research. What about if we had not just set and setting, but set, setting, and setup? And what does that mean? Let's take a look at the anatomy of a session, pulling apart what could happen in a session that is designed to unlock true creative breakthroughs for technical, nerdy people. It really could be for anything, for a new form of government, or a new crypto way to do crypto that's unhackable or something. Who knows? It could be for any solution. So the human subject data point is one. It's me, from my experience. I think it starts with, and this is what David Nutt said, for prepared minds, this can work. That was his intuition. So prepare the mind. Set up the intention. The practices that you do during the trip, if you're not too high, would happen post-peak for sure. After the healing, perhaps, comes the revealing. You then surrender and quieten your mind. Twiddle those knobs. Endo then meets exo. Turn on your powers of imagination, your powers of intuition. Turn them on in the trip. Let them help guide what's happening. And start a free association storm. Anneal the insight, crystallize the insight, receive it. Be on station and quiet to receive it, and run a high-speed camera to record what's going on. Then, later, re-trip it. Go and re-trip it. That's what I learned that I had to do, to pattern it into memory, or it is gone, just like Gerald Hurd said, is gone. And I would record it, I would write it, I would draw it, I would re-experience it, I retell it to people with full emotion, and like I'm doing it again. And that creates a library of experiences you can start again in a future trip. It's amazing, you have a whole library to pull from. And then land the insight, record and notate it, translate it into language that makes sense for the world and for your colleagues. Share with your peers. Propose it and test it. Test the hypothesis. Then publish. So there's another step, which is you can come back. So subsequent to 2013, I've gone back into the medicine states multiple times to refine the hypothesis, and now there's a whole new generation of things happening. So to finish up, the open questions, do the breakthroughs happen? Can they happen during a trip, or they must happen after? Harman gave normal doses of LSD to his engineers, and then they studied them for months with problems that they come up with increased brain flexibility. Dosing. Do you want to do a blockbusting breakthrough and do you need a heroic dose? Or is that just not going to happen? Or is it going to happen by creative enhancement later? Microdosing. What about continuous creative enhancement, which is happening in Silicon Valley and other places? How do we safely work with those on the spectrum? We can get pretty tweaked, us, as any of us can, but we have social anxiety. We have fragilities. How can we be worked with? Psychosis is dangerously close to highly creative states in highly creative people, which was discovered by the work with the Iowa Writers Workshop, mood disorders and things like that. Where and how do we do clinical trials? And what the next steps might be is, can we open a fourth path in psychedelic research? Given that I'm defining the first path as indigenous use, then personal growth and expression, now therapeutic applications, and fourth path would be altering states for creative breakthroughs for society. I expect that the logical way to start is to invite the world to send on their phones survey forms, just as is being done by Paul Stamets' group. Report your experience. If you are using this in this way, we could develop an enormous historical database of work and base the science on that. Nut says measurement. How are we going to measure what creativity is and happening with or without these practices? And what we want to get to is two messages. The message of validation, that this works, and valorization, which is that it is a good thing to do, that society supports this practice, that it is not a shameful thing to admit, and that your company may be doing drug testing, but they have a big exception for this. Then we have to consider legal and normative practices around this. And I'd like to call for collaboration from people in this room to form a working group to explore this. And what do we name this whole thing? This morning I came up, what came out of a waking dream was Psyjan, Psychedelics and Genius. I don't know if it's a good name at all. So final proposal, and then we'll wrap it up. So here we have the message in the psychedelic bottle, but given that psychedelics can also be endotrip, maybe they're not too far apart if it's all tryptamine surges. Perhaps through this initiative, we can move into a psychedelic culture in which the medicines of healing can also serve as the elixirs of discovery, of revealing. So we can perhaps use a different name for these substances in this context, because people aren't, well, I'm not sick or I'm not tweaked in some way, and the sort of the connotations, what if it's an elixir? When you're doing it as an elixir, you're doing it for these magical, mystical, spectacular things. And it's a different way, it's a different intention. We name the medicine a different way, it will be different for us and within us. So how much time do we have? All right, okay. So to land this, I want to go back to, do you mind if I read you a short poem? I know fans of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy remember the Vogons? Oh no, Vogon poetry. So anyway, so this is, I tried to find this guy online. I can't find anything about him. His name is George Andrews. And this poem is in the Psychedelic Review, 1963, first edition, along with Alan Watts and Gerald Hurd and Huxley and everybody else. And it's so beautiful. And I thought this will land us in the heart of the matter. I am alive within the living God. I throb unique among the infinite variations. And so what if all the evolution of consciousness only leads to knowledge that I am a germ in the guts of the greater being? You can tell this guy was a first-generation acid taker. This may have been his first trip. It's a gift to us. I am older than creation, older than all beings. The stars revolve within me. I voyage through the inner space between my atoms. I take spaceships to different parts of my body, wheeling through the zodiac, weaving the fate of future races. I conceive a cosmos where life does not need to kill to live. Isn't that beautiful? It brings a tear to my eye. Create a system free from pain. And in the spawn and seethe of the primeval ocean, out of chaos, I pass the current immortal diamonds shimmering on the foam of the instant now. Scintillating images of the flux that never fixes. Thank you for joining me on this trip.
Thank you. Let's open the floor for questions. Right over here.
Wow. 100,000 types of beautiful. That was just fantastic. Your description of your own journeys, unbelievable. That's one of the best I've heard. What you're talking about is a systemized way of bringing medicine into the development of technologies and solutions. As somebody who's on the ground and doing this work and been doing it a long time, I can tell you we've been there. We've been there for a while. We've worked concertedly into avenues of Silicon Valley. We are working with people at Google. We're working with people at JPL. We're working with people throughout the industries. In particular, as we spoke about earlier, when we became aware of developments in AI, we were quite concerned that it was being generated, developed, the foundations coded and programmed by people with a very technological bent and a way of seeing the world through that lens, and in particular, a whole lot of people with Asperger's. And so we worked very diligently at finding ways to make it comfortable for them to do medicine, and with spectacular results. I can tell you that for us it was essential to make sure that the seeds of medicine were there in that technology in the nascency of its development. I don't know that we have succeeded. I don't know that, in any way one force,
What I see as you're talking is a birth. It's like a sperm or a seed going from these beautiful creative beings into the next being,
Precisely that.
into its birth, and it's the same seed that carried all the way through. So thank you for your work.
I can tell you one thing just to add to that is that in several cases, and in one particular, there was a gentleman who was even able to, at a point in ceremony, tell us that he had, in fact, transcended his Asperger's. So thank you again.
Thank you.
It's not really a question. But
and I can add to that I'm meeting more and more companies that are founded through medicine. So there's one particular that just got a $55 million phase B or stage B funding. And it's all done, conceived through medicine work, and it's an ethos of Aya throughout the company. They're doing extremely well. So this is happening. Next question.
Next. Oh, here we go.
Thank you, that was incredible. I just wanted to ask if you think this methodology would be good with other psychedelic medicines apart from ayahuasca?
That's a very good question. And I literally took, a lot of medicine after I had that experience with Terrence's mushrooms. And I did A-B comparisons, ABC comparisons. And they each had their own personality and their own nature. And it's like with acid at a high dose, what I learned was if you can call it down, it's like moving. It's high up, it's ethereal. And so what I would sit and say, slow, slow, and I would feel it take my mind and often slow, land, we need you here, we need you in the room. You are a being, you have a history on this earth. You came from ergot poisons. You are here and we need you to be present with us. So in a way, maybe it was talking to my own mind, but in the metaphor of that's the relationship. And finally, we're now all here. We're not going, choo, 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 choo. You know, mushrooms, different personality. The little children, Marie Sabina was right. They really are. And they're sometimes uncomfortable in our system. That's why I think we get all sick. And so I learned a new practice of meeting them at the door. Like the doorbell rings and there's this alien spacecraft. And I bring my endo system to greet them. Hello, welcome. All the energy I can muster to invite them in. And so instead of like, oh my God, the mushrooms are coming on, you know, that comes later. But I said, I have prepared a playground for you and a cocoon for you. And then they come in and they're, oh. And there's a moment where I call it the insporulation, where they myceliate through my system. And like, it's again union. It's like the union of the endo and the exo with ayahuasca. It was now we're in union. We're one. And each of those, it's sort of a sub-practice under each medicine. But I think if we approach the medicine with contracts and agreements and invitations, you know, Terence always used to say, be gentle, you know. But I think we establish a new relationship, and then each medicine can do its job, can do a different job. Aya for me was just a huge performer. It was just because it's so native to our, and with the DMT and all the things that are in there. It's like not alien to us. So it's 10 hours of beautiful dance. Yeah. Another question?
Feel like I'm cheating a little bit since we had a little interview, but Bruce, thank you so much. That was wonderful. It's great to empathize with some of that in my own life and going through those experiences and playing with this endo matrix a little bit. I wondered if you could just go back to what DMT, whether NN or 5-MeO, in that endogenous state, could tell us about, you know, the pure information system or the unitive experience, and what that might say about the system behind it all.
Yeah, you know, as we are the universe's greatest creation. A lacuma tree in a place that Dennis and I love dearly spoke to me one night and said, you are our greatest creation. And you are tearing the world apart. And we could hear a truck on the Alante Tambo highway with a guy at dawn delivering fuel, trying to earn extra soles, driven by a thing called a corporation, which is another kind of a tree. But the lacuma had been there for 1,000 years. And she said, I know what is happening, but you are the most beautiful children. And we are doing everything we possibly can to steer this thing, because you're unruly children. Sometimes you're not paying attention and you're taking too much. But this is why we're engaging you and putting the most powerful thing we know, because evolution isn't going to take no for an answer. It took 4.1 billion years and incredible improbabilities to get to this. The Earth is dying. If you look at it, now that when I see pictures of the Earth from space, it's like, oh my God, it's a sick planet. It has belt deserts. It has glaciation that comes down. It's because James Lovelock lives 10 miles from here, wrote in a beautiful book 10 years ago that the thermostat is going like this now. And it was going like this as we evolved. It created us. It dried out East Africa and made us into who we are now. We're creatures of extreme climate shock. That's what we are. And so it's preparing us to help the Earth to transcend this thing of its death. And this Venus Terminator is coming closer. According to Lovelock, it's 100 million years out, and that's quick. Venus was gobbled up, went to a hothouse hell. When we go through it, we flip and we become Venus. And pretty much no complex life, just microbes in the rocks. And so their stakes are incredibly high. So every time I make contact with that thing, I ask it about, do you mind who we are and what we are? And I always get, no, just do the act. Grow up. Stand up. Look out. Look in. You are the ones. You are going to carry life forward. You are not only the stewards, but the reproductive organs of this incredibly rare experiment that's extremely rare in the cosmos. Exoplanets aren't like this planet. We're really, really rare. There's 3 or 4 more terms on Drake's equations. We're vanishingly, scarily rare. And so we have this responsibility. But pushing up is 4 billion years of probabilistic shaping of the future, driving, and it is driving us from below. No, so no matter what we think, we worry about our little things, guess what? Nuclear weapons went away. It was miraculous. The CIA didn't predict that. You know, it's like probabilistic shaping. Like, we're going to keep these things going. We're going to keep driving them because it's too precious to not have go forward. Now, as we contact that and we realize there's a bigger force, it's called the force of life itself. We contact that, we become into union with it. There is nothing we can't do. There's nothing we cannot face in the external world or in our own hearts. There is nothing that will threaten that beautiful emergence and program. Nothing. If we contact with that, if we pay attention. And I think these elixirs give us the moment to open the pore. Pores are always the connection with the outside world. And ask, what do we do? If we're the beautiful progeny, we're the kindergartners, teacher, help us out. Give us a game. Give us anything. We'll zoom around. Give us something, a story. Give us a vision. But the things we need now are the things that is about the whole program. The health, the thriving, the future, the replication of the biosphere, its continuation for 1 billion more years. This is what we're asking for help for. This is our contract and agreement. And as the medicines become more tuned, more powerful, as our minds become healed, as pathways grow, we can open that pore. And then the non-local, crazy probabilistic stuff coming through that pore lines people up in future pathways. You know, Paul Stamets' work, it's an amazingly improbable lining up to get that stack. What if that stack is the igniter for 1 billion people? It could be. All these things are coming down from the future to us that we pick up. And if we're clear-minded, if we're not criticizing each other, if we're not in states of anxiety and terror, we can have clear mind and we can pick them up and we can love each other and go forward with all those gifts that are going to come to us to show us how to do it.
Thank you.
Not to rain on the parade, but I mean, indigenous people right now are very concerned about how their plants are being used in centers and in Europe and healing centers outside of context, while their lands are being destroyed and their cultures and languages are vanishing. And now the stakes in this proposal, the stakes are even higher, where not only are there plants or the compounds derived thereof, to heal people, but now to make wonderful scientific discoveries and profit from them. So how do you see the ethical question of, how do we not just acknowledge, but help the indigenous peoples that maintain these mysteries alive?
And I would invite you to join our working group because we need help. It's just me. So you could really ask those questions. They're very important questions. Because perhaps, like an example of this company friend of mine, they imaged the rainforest from space to calculate carbon credits to sell to Microsoft. Like, they're the biggest remarketer of carbon credits. And now they work with people on the ground to do replanting with indigenous people, because they're all from South America, the company founders, and do rich replantings, like create marshlands, reconstruct the jungle as it was. And then the carbon credits go up. The people get more pay because more companies are buying it because the yields are higher. And it's this company that, for me, is a perfect marriage of all of that they can have their habitat come back, their homeland be restored.
I mean, because if the problem is capitalism, more capitalism isn't going to cure the disease. That's my only final thought.
But I think, in a sense, capitalism that's inspired by a brilliant heart and a really true, a true from the core mission to do good in the world. And I don't know what we call that capital. I don't know what we call that even. But there are people in the world that walk that talk. And I think as they come out of the woodwork and they join together, we're going to have use all the tools at our behest, but not abuse the tools. Yeah.
Bruce, you project a more hopeful vision than I've been feeling lately. You know, I wonder, you say the Lukuma told us that we are evolution's greatest gift, the greatest invention for life, and sometimes I wonder if we're evolution's greatest mistake. You know, and I think the human species is quite arrogant, you know, and it's kind of built into the way we are. I think it's not up to us necessarily to save the planet. I think, you know, you mentioned my molecular journey through photosynthesis that I had so many years ago. That was such an important, you know, sort of framing of my own understanding. And the take-home message was, you monkeys only think you're running the show. You know, and I think what we have to understand is we are not running the show, and it is not necessarily up to us as a species. It's beyond our capability. What it is up to, what we can do, is recognize that we're part of this. You know, it almost sounds trivial or cliche to say it, but we are part of this community of sentient species, the biospheric community of sentient species, which is an intelligence. It is like, and the way that we are, many things are on the planet. You know, the biosphere is a superorganism. It's just vastly more intelligent, vastly older. It works things out on time scales that we cannot comprehend. I mean, this is what my Stephen Buhner's book has sort of articulated for me. You know, if there is a hopeful message here, it is the realization that what's happening to the planet is not our fault necessarily. I mean, we've certainly contributed to it, but it is also the planet knows what's happening to it. You know, and you know, what's hopeful about his perception is we're not alone. It's not that it's up to us to save this biosphere. It's not up to us, the human species. It's up to us, the community of life, to save the planet. And we need to listen more than we need to dictate what's happening. I don't know. You know, what concerns me is that systems seem to be collapsing so quickly that if we don't make the changes that we have to make within the next, you know, clearly foreseeable decades, then it will be too late, because we'll have destabilized and irrevocably broken the homeostatic systems that are keeping things in balance. The whole Lovelock scenario, the runaway greenhouse effect. You know, as sad as it may be, we will not live to the point where we see the extinction of life on the earth, or even of our species, although depending on, you know, what stupid things we decide to do with nuclear weapons in the next 10 years may change that perception. But it's not that we'll reach that, but we'll reach a point where we realize it really is too late. You know, it's too late to do anything. Maybe it was always too late. I don't know, but I think everybody shares that concern. So, you know.
And that puts the urgency behind this.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dennis.
And why can't we stop fighting with each other? That's the question. I mean, our society is so fractious in so many ways that it seems that, you know, I mean, we have to wake up and we have to wise up, and we just don't seem to be able to get past, you know, the fractiousness that's tearing apart civilization and the biosphere that supports it. So I just I wish I knew. Anyway.
I think we have time for one more. Do we have time for one more?
Christian wanted to ask a question. It was more a comment on. Well, first of all, I think it was very, very inspiring to hear you speak. Thank you very much for sharing everything you shared here with us. And I also share with you, I see this myself. I've given birth to a project which is 100% inspired and influenced and guided by my experiences with the plant medicines. I don't know if it will be successful yet, but let's see. But I see around many of these projects that are emerging now, where there's been so much deep consideration, not just mental, but emotional, physical, essential consideration going into it. And I also think, as a comment on the capitalism, you know, just like we are talking about these compounds, these molecules as a tool. Can't remember if it was you or the previous speaker speaking about the hammer. Capitalism is the same. You know, it's a system, and it's not good or it's not bad. Human beings are making it good or bad depending on how they relate to it. And I do think we're going to see a whole new wave of enterprises that are emerging, that are redefining what capitalism can be and should be, and what it stands for. And this is super inspiring to me. And I think this type of work, to really more consciously and more systematically assist people to develop these ideas and these new projects and these new initiatives with the support of these type of processes and these compounds is a tremendous opportunity. So
could you be our young entrepreneur delegate to the working group?
No, I would be very happy to engage and interact, and I'd love to speak more about it. Thank you.
Do we have time for one more?
We're done.
Okay, we got one more back here.
I'd just like to ask a question in the idea of endogenous and exogenous. In terms of your experience that you had towards working out the origins of life, whether you had a sense of the influence of creation from an endogenous perspective or an exogenous perspective with the planet.
With the planet?
Yeah, so that force of creation that we feel all the time, whether you had any sense, and maybe you didn't, but maybe you had any sense of the creation process being an endogenous process from within the planet and within the species, within everything that existed at that time, or whether there was an external influence which was sort of guiding the process.
I think when I was 9 or 10 and discovering that field, that synchronous field, and the visuals and the TV channels, I just assumed it was part of the world. It was just there, you could trust it, you could tap into it, all kinds of, it was cool. It was like having cable TV before cable TV, or the internet before the internet. It was a kind of psychic internet. But I didn't know any other that this thing can't, nobody told me it couldn't exist, so I developed that relationship. And really, everything that's come since has been through a partnership and a dance with that. And some of the extreme states where I felt the entire biosphere, where I felt the biosphere facing 13 billion years of its creation back to the cosmogenesis, coming over the horizon as a green sheet, coming over, it was still like the presence, all of it was life. All of it was aware in its own way of its place in the universe, but it was coming into awareness. It's like earthworms, if they'd grown up and gotten college degrees, you know, their awareness would have been olfactory and sensory on the skin, and they would have a fantastic experience, in a sense, a visionary experience, different from ours, but in a sense, it's the same field. It's the same thing that is made by the living bolus itself. And then if we focus our attention on life, and we don't say, create a new God in a panpsychist universe, like some want to do, or new explanations coming from outside, and just look down the barrel of that microscope and see those wiggling polymers and that complex mixture we just got out of the hot spring with glowing, oh my God, that's so complex. That's what birth does. You just feel it. And then you own life. You merge and unify with life itself. It's there. It's enough. It's enough to sort of blow this little one's mind years ago and then again and again. I think of refocusing on life itself as the gift, as the miracle, as our God, as our spirit, is a reunification with the indigenous knowing of a long time, but through a scientific lens. And that it's an awestruckness, it's a partnership, it's a dance, and we can go and touch it, and we can ask it things, and we can receive from it in ways we couldn't have done a generation ago or 150 years ago. Ways few who were able to do it. We have the tools now to touch this thing that is life in a brand new way, not through story, not through stuff written down in books, but directly. And so that I feel like we're going to touch and be touched by this totality that is life coming from the earth, that is so improbable. 4.1 billion years of moving and struggle. It creates a lot of intention and a lot of powers in there. So I guess that's more of a poetic answer. Yeah.
Okay, up front.
This isn't a question, but I thought I'd use it anyway, that we've been trying to interview James Lovelock for months now. So if anybody has contact to him, we'd appreciate it.
Okay. So I'm available for the rest of the conference, happy to sit down with you, and I'd like to hear your stories. If you have experiences along these lines, I think it's better, the moment is now to gather our beautiful insights and our own experiences and look at what is the tapestry of this thing that could emerge. And if you want to join an effort, you can head a department and if you have some skills in that area. So thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you. In 5 minutes, we will continue with Mark Plotkin. This is like a bathroom break, not a tea break.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
How do you feel? Honestly amazing.
Here, I'm gonna.
You're on the edge of it, I promise.